I paid for my daughter's wedding, every petal, every candle, every inch of that ballroom, gleaming under crystal lights. But instead of gratitude, she handed me humiliation, wrapped in a smile. In front of 200 guests, she called my life a midlife crisis, my work a fantasy, my dreams expired. And I just sat there, smiling. Because if I'd opened my mouth, I might have screamed. But the real twist came minutes later, when the groom's boss nearly choked on his champagne after hearing my name. He stood up, grabbed the microphone, and what he said made my daughter cry in front of everyone. That was the moment the laughter died and the truth finally spoke. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me and listening to me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reached. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story touches, you don't forget to subscribe to the Never Too Late channel, where stories like mine remind us that every ending can still turn into a beginning. My name is Vespera Wynn, and this is what really happened that night in Savannah. The chandeliers over Mercer House Hall burned brighter than I could stand, their light cutting through crystal glasses and laughter that didn't sound like laughter at all. 200 guests leaned toward the stage, where my daughter Sloane held a microphone glowing in white satin, radiant and cruel without meaning to be. I sat at the second table close enough to smell the champagne on her breath and the perfume on the maid of honor, Tara. They were about to talk about me, something I'd been warned about but never prepared for. Tara started sweetly, the kind of opening that promises kindness. Let's give a little love to the woman who made tonight possible, Mrs. Vespera Wynn Applause, polite and warm, before she smiled wider. She's been going through what we lovingly call a late-life empire phase. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. At 62, she decided she wants to be the next Silicon Valley founder right here in Savannah. She made air quotes around empire. The laughter thickened. I placed my spoon beside my cup to stop my hand from shaking. Then Sloane took over. Yes, my mom still thinks she's in Silicon Valley. She's been busy building what she calls Wynn & Co. Holdings. The crowd laughed again, and this time it sounded rehearsed. I smiled the kind of smile that holds the jaw in place so the heart doesn't show. I reminded myself not to ruin her wedding. She'd said, "Mom, please, tonight isn't about your business. Don't bring it up." I'd promised. Through the mirrored wall behind the stage, I caught a reflection of myself, an older woman in a dark emerald gown, too simple for this chandelier world. The mirrors multiplied me into 100 quiet spectators. The more they laughed, the smaller I became. Then I noticed a man at table 6 watching me instead of laughing, Grant Marcel, Caleb's boss, the COO of North Star Microsystems. His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes said, "He knows this doesn't fit." The laughter rose again. Tara said, "You've got to admire her. Most moms her age are gardening, and she's still chasing dreams that expired before Y2K. The microphone crackled a little louder than before. Someone had turned up the volume right as the punchline hit. The crowd erupted. I saw Sloane's shoulders relax. She thought the night was going perfectly. What no one knew was that I'd paid for nearly 40% of this perfect night, every chandelier light reflected off my bank statement. I'd signed an extra invoice that morning for the venue manager who'd slipped me a folder to sign, quietly thinking I was just the mother of the bride trying to help. The money came from Wynn & Co., the holding company they thought was a delusion. At table 8, 3 clusters of guests chatted loudly, executives from Henderson Group Patel Systems and North Star Microsystems. I knew every one of their companies intimately. They didn't know I owned them. Someone at the back shouted, "Don't worry, Vespera. Maybe your next wedding will fund your first IPO laughter again." I gripped the strap of my clutch, ready to leave, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the thought of the mirror. Maybe the weight of the signed invoice in my purse. Or maybe I wanted to see just how far they'd go. Then Sloane said, You know, dreams have expiration dates." The laughter hit harder this time. I turned my head slightly, looked at Grant Marcel again. He wasn't laughing. He was studying me. I realized then that silence could feel like drowning, but I stayed seated, composed, invisible, because I wasn't done yet, and neither was the night. 2 years earlier, I'd been a woman standing at the edge of nothing. The company I'd served for 3 decades laid me off in a restructuring. My husband left 2 months later for a woman 15 years younger, claiming he needed energy in his life. Energy. What I needed was air. At 60, I had 2 choices: fade quietly into Savannah's polite invisibility, or bet everything I'd learned on myself. I chose the second. I turned my dining table into an office and built Wynn & Coware Holdings. I signed my documents as V. Wynn, not Vespera, because the world took a man with initials more seriously than a woman with wrinkles. I spent sleepless months studying markets, learning the rhythms of acquisition and the language of leverage. I didn't chase miracles. I hunted logic. I looked for companies with annual revenues between 10 and 45 million, healthy, but mismanaged. They didn't need visionaries. They needed someone who could keep the lights on and the books clean. The first was a small IoT manufacturer in Raleigh. They had great engineers, but chaos in logistics. I cut waste by 18% within 2 quarters. Then came a pair of software firms, one handling industrial data, the other SaaS maintenance tools. I merged their HR, accounting, and legal teams into shared services. Profit margins climbed faster than even I expected. Then came the 4th and 5th, an agricultural analytics startup, and data flow systems. I didn't buy them for glamour, I bought them for their math. The 6th was the hardest, North Star Microsystems, the very place where my daughter's fiancé worked. I almost walked away, afraid it would tangle business with blood. But the deal made too much sense. I signed it under NDA, telling no one, especially not Sloan. When I finished the North Star acquisition, my portfolio was worth $50 million on paper. I still lived in my small apartment on River Street, still drove the same car, still answered no phone calls after dinner. I didn't need the world to see. I needed it to run. I once read that power isn't about volume, it's about timing. So I waited. I let everyone think Wynn & Co. was a hobby, a distraction from old age, even Sloan. Last spring, my sister Miriam sent a link in our family chat, a business column about a mysterious investor V, Wynn, who was quietly buying southeastern tech firms. She wrote, "This name sounds familiar?" Sloan read it and replied with a laughing emoji. That told me everything about how she saw me, a harmless dreamer. During my due diligence for North Star, I noticed a signature on their internal memos, Grant Marcel, COO. His operational structure matched mine. I marked him in my notebook, potential ally if exposure becomes necessary. The confirmation email for North Star's acquisition came on the night of the rehearsal dinner. I stared at the screen, the words glowing like fate, transaction completed. I looked across the restaurant table at Sloan, glowing, happy, naive. She said, "Mom, tomorrow, please don't talk about your little company." "Okay?" I smiled. "Of course not, sweetheart." That night, I promised her silence. The next evening, under those chandeliers, I kept it. But the thing about silence is it never lasts. The night before the wedding smelled like jasmine and champagne. The rehearsal dinner at Forsyth Park Inn shimmered under soft gold string lights, the kind of setting that made everything look perfect, even the parts of a family that weren't. The long table was filled with laughter glass clinks and polite toasts. It was supposed to be a warm evening before the big day, but every word felt like I was walking across thin glass. That morning, I had signed the second transfer for the wedding expenses through a silent intermediary account. Flowers venue, and the band all cleared without my name attached. I'd done it deliberately. Sloan wanted the wedding to look like it was paid for entirely by the young couple. She didn't want anyone to think her mother was the kind of woman who used money to feel relevant. I honored that wish like I had honored so many before. At the table, Sloan leaned toward me, her tone light but the words sharp. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Tomorrow, could you please not bring up your business around Caleb's colleagues? They all work in tech. I just don't want them to think you're playing entrepreneur." She laughed at the end as if to soften the cut. I looked at her face, glowing in the candlelight, a woman who once clung to my shoulder when she couldn't sleep. "If that's what you need for tomorrow, I'll stay quiet," I said. Caleb, sitting next to her, nodded like he was the wise mediator. "It's good to stay active at your age, Mom. Just don't put too much pressure on yourself to make it something big. Sometimes hobbies are enough." The word hobbies hit harder than intended. I stirred my tea, kept my eyes down, and smiled. Of course. When the manager from the venue approached with an updated invoice for the wine I signed, quickly slipping it into my wallet, I thought no one saw me until I caught a subtle glance from across the path. Grant Marcel Northstar's COO, standing with a glass in hand. His eyes lingered on the slip where my signature V. Win was visible before I tucked it away. His brow furrowed slightly, but he looked away. At the end of dinner, while others toasted, I overheard Sloan and Tara near the fountain rehearsing part of the speech. You have to hit the expiration date part with a pause. Tara said, laughing, "Like dreams do have expiration dates." They giggled, clinking their glasses. I stared into my cup, listening to the hum of insects over the laughter. I told myself it was just harmless fun, but somewhere deep inside, something fragile began to splinter. My phone buzzed on the table. A notification from a local finance news app popped up. V-Win expands holdings, becomes Southeast's quiet power player. My name, my invisible name, was trending. I silenced the phone and slipped it into my purse. As people drifted away from the garden, I stayed behind to help the staff gather candles. The night was warm, the cicadas loud. Grant passed by again, his eyes brushing over me with that same quiet recognition, as though he was trying to remember where he'd seen that signature before. When the last light dimmed, I sat alone under the oak tree and asked myself a question I hadn't dared to before. Is silence still kindness when it helps others disrespect you? By the time I stood to leave, I already knew my answer. Tomorrow, I would keep my promise. But if they touched my dignity, I wouldn't stay quiet. The night unfolded exactly as I'd feared. Mercer House Hall glowed like a ballroom from another century. Crystal chandeliers, silver cutlery, the hum of jazz playing beneath conversations. I'd spent the dinner keeping my smile steady, reminding myself I was here for Sloan. That was before the microphone started moving down the line of bridesmaids. Tara was the first. Her speech began softly with talk of friendship and gratitude, and then curved into ridicule like a blade hidden in lace. And of course, we can't forget the mother of the bride, our favorite CEO in training. She's been taking entrepreneurship classes. 60 and fearless. The crowd laughed. Sloan didn't stop her. Then Sloan herself took the microphone. "Thanks, Tara," she said, glowing in her gown. "Yes, Mom's been busy building her empire. We keep telling her not everyone's born to lead, but she's determined." Laughter rippled again, louder this time. I took a slow sip of water, my hands trembling just enough to make the glass clink. Through the laughter, I saw faces. I recognized the Hendersons from Henderson Group, the Patels from Dataflow Systems, and a table full of Northstar staff. I wanted to tell them they were laughing at the person who paid their bonuses. Instead, I smiled, adjusted my bracelet, and waited for it to end. Then the MC's voice rose. Would the mother of the bride like to say a few words? The spotlight brushed my face. For a second, I considered it. But before I could stand, Sloan waved quickly. "Oh, no, Mom's shy. She's not one for speeches." She was smiling at me, her expression somewhere between affection and warning. I sat down again. For the first time, I realized silence wasn't my choice anymore. It had been taken from me. Caleb appeared at my shoulder, resting his hand lightly as if I were fragile. "Don't mind them," he said softly. "It's an honor, really. They're teasing because they love you. Most people your age aren't even trying new things." His words were syrupy but hollow. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a performance one he could pat on the back. I smiled, but something inside me hardened. After dessert, I slipped away to the restroom, locking myself inside one of the stalls. I pulled out my phone and saw a new message. "Congratulations, V. Win acquisition officially approved. Welcome to North Star family." My pulse stilled. North Star, the company where my new son-in-law worked, the company half the room relied on. I read the message twice, the irony pressing against my chest, like laughter I couldn't let out. I had just become the controlling shareholder of the company that signed Caleb's paycheck on the same night I was being mocked for pretending to have a business. I walked back into the corridor feeling strangely weightless. Grant Marcel stood there talking quietly into his phone. When he saw me, he paused mid-sentence. His gaze met mine and recognition flashed across his face, the kind that clicks like a lock opening. He smiled slow and knowing and nodded once before walking back into the ballroom. For a brief moment, I stood under the archway listening to the sound of laughter spilling out into the hall. They were still laughing about me. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, took a breath, and walked back inside. I had promised silence, but silence, I realized, was no longer mine to keep. The ballroom had shifted into its softer phase, the cocktail hour that followed dinner, when laughter came easier and secrets stayed near the rim of a glass. I stood near the bar, half hidden behind a column draped in ivy, pretending to study the pattern on my napkin. I wasn't hiding, not really, just buying time before I could politely leave without raising questions. The air smelled like sugar and money. I could feel my own silence pressing against my ribs. Mrs. Wynne. The voice was low-measured. I turned to find Grant Marcel holding a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. "Grant," he said, offering his hand Caleb's boss. I just wanted to introduce myself. His grip was firm, the kind that belonged to someone used to control. "I hear you do consulting work." "I do," I said evenly. "Acquisitions, restructuring, operational efficiency." He nodded, his tone polite but faintly amused. "Interesting. I've just been through an acquisition myself, actually, a company called Wynne & Co. Holdings." I held his gaze. "Yes, I know them." His smile deepened. "Small world." "Do you know the owner? I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm the one who signed your acquisition papers." His glass jerked slightly in his hand. The champagne nearly spilled over. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The jazz music behind us seemed to dim. Then very quietly, he said, "You're V. Wynne only on paper," I answered. Vespera Wynne doesn't make headlines. He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if to be sure no one was close enough to hear. "Half this room works for companies you own," he whispered. "Henderson's Patel's, the North Star Group. Even me." "I know," I said softly. "I signed their checks." His exhale came out like disbelief. "And they just spent the evening mocking the woman who writes their paychecks." "It's fine," I said. "They don't know. They see what they want to see, a mother past her prime pretending to build an empire." Grant shook his head. "That's not fine. That's indecent." His voice tightened, not from anger, but from shame. Shame by association. I looked toward the dance floor. Sloane was laughing with her friends, her arm linked through Caleb's. She was beautiful and oblivious. I'd once thought keeping her comfortable meant keeping myself small. Caleb wandered by his tie, loosened his confidence drunk. "Grant," he called out. "Hope Mom's not bending your ear about business again. She's addicted to that stuff." He winked at me like we shared a joke. I smiled back, my voice smooth. "Just talking about work, Caleb. Something some people think has an expiration date." He laughed, not hearing the sting, and drifted away. Grant's expression didn't change. "I can't let this go on," he said quietly. "You've been insulted in front of your own family and your employees. They need to know who they're talking about." "No," I said, setting down my glass. "Not tonight. It's my daughter's wedding. She wanted peace. I'll give her that. Peace at the cost of your dignity." At the cost of hers, I replied. If the truth comes out now, it won't just humble her, it'll crush her. Let them laugh. It's almost over. But Grant didn't move. His jaw tightened, his gaze flicking toward the stage where the microphone waited. The DJ was swapping playlists, checking sound levels. He looked at me one last time, and I knew what he was thinking. I could have stopped him. I didn't. I had chosen silence. But silence, I was learning, had a life of its own. The first notes of a slow jazz number had just started when Grant stepped onto the stage. I was standing near the exit, seconds away from slipping out for air. The microphone gave a faint pop as he tapped it, and the music fell away. The crowd turned puzzled, but still smiling. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Before we begin the dancing, I need to say something." I froze. Sloane, standing at the center of the dance floor, looked up confused. Caleb frowned. Grant wasn't supposed to be part of the speeches. He continued steady and unhurried. "Tonight we've celebrated love, family, and new beginnings. But we've also witnessed something else, something I can't ignore. The woman who has been laughed at, who has sat quietly through every joke, is not the person you think she is." The room went still. The clinking of glasses stopped. "I'm talking about Mrs. Vespera Wynne Grant," said, his tone sharpening. "Or as some of you might know her from financial filings, V. Wynne, founder and CEO of Wynne & Cohen Holdings." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere, a glass hit the floor. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. I wanted to stop him, but the truth was already running loose. Grant went on louder now. "Wynne & Coas owns 6 companies, one of them being North Star Microsystems, where our groom Caleb Hart proudly works. Half of you here are employed by firms under her portfolio, and tonight you mocked the woman who signs your paychecks." Caleb's face drained of color. Sloane's lips parted in disbelief. The DJ froze with his hand on the turntable. Grant pointed gently toward me. "That's your real boss. That's the woman you owe your salaries to. The one you dismissed as having a late-life hobby." No one spoke. The laughter that had filled the room all evening had vanished into the walls. I could feel the air shift, the humiliation reversing direction. The Patels were whispering rapidly. The Hendersons looked like they wanted to vanish into the carpet. Grant turned back to me. "Mrs. Wynne, I think everyone here should hear from you directly." He stepped down from the stage and held out the microphone. I didn't move at first. Every instinct screamed to leave, to disappear before this turned into spectacle. But then I saw Sloane. Her eyes were wide, wet, and afraid. Not for me, for herself. The truth was rewriting her story right in front of her guests. I walked to the stage slowly, my heels quiet against the marble floor. Grant placed the microphone in my hand. The weight of it was heavier than I expected, almost like a gavel. I didn't plan to speak tonight, I said, my voice steady, though my pulse roared in my ears. But sometimes, silence gives people the wrong impression. I looked across the room. Faces that had once smirked now held a nervous awe. Yes, I'm V. Wynne. I started my company 2 years ago after losing my job and my marriage. I built it from my dining table. I kept it private because I wanted my work to speak louder than my words. I never wanted recognition, only respect. Sloane's voice trembled from the center of the floor. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried, you rolled your eyes," I said quietly. "You told me not to embarrass you in front of Caleb's friends. You said my dreams had an expiration date." I paused, letting the silence settle. "You wanted me invisible, so I became invisible. But invisibility doesn't mean I disappeared." Caleb stepped forward, his face pale. "Mrs. Wynne," I raised a hand. "Save it. Respect isn't something you apologize into existence." The room held its breath. I took one final look at my daughter. I thought, keeping quiet protected you, but dignity and love don't live in the same room as humiliation. You can't protect someone by letting them step on you. I handed the microphone back to Grant and walked off the stage. Behind me, the room stayed silent, the chandeliers glittering like cold stars over the wreckage of laughter that had died moments ago. That night, I finally understood I had spent years mastering silence, but silence had never belonged to me. It belonged to the people who mistook it for weakness. Now they knew better. The ballroom was silent, the air heavy with embarrassment and the sharp glint of crystal light. The chandeliers above me no longer looked elegant. They looked judgmental, every crystal drop catching and refracting the truth I had just been forced to claim. My fingers tightened around the microphone. I could have walked away right then, slipped into the night and let the rumors tell their version of me. But I stayed. Because for once I wanted my daughter to hear my voice without apology. Yes, I said my voice calm and even. I am V. Wynn. I run Wynn & Co. Holdings. A faint gasp ran through the crowd, followed by stillness so deep that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner above. I never told anyone, I continued, because I believed that those who loved me didn't need proof of who I was. I was wrong. I turned my eyes toward Sloane. Her perfect bridal curls trembled slightly. You asked me not to say anything tonight, and I kept my word. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Her mouth parted, eyes glassy. Caleb gripped her hand, but kept his head bowed. I could see the calculation behind his blank stare, realization unfolding in pieces. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded document the venue manager had handed me the day before. Most of what you see tonight, the flowers, the music this ballroom was paid for by Wynn & Co., not by any divorce settlement or retirement fund. You told me not to embarrass you by mentioning my work. But tell me, Sloane, are you embarrassed now knowing the woman you mocked built this entire night? Whispers scattered across the room. Someone near the back muttered, "She paid for the wedding." Another voice hissed, "All of it." Grant's voice broke through the murmurs, steady and unflinching. "Not just the wedding," he said. "Half of this room works for companies owned by Wynn & Co. Chairs scraped. People shifted uneasily, their champagne glasses suddenly too heavy to hold. The Hendersons, the Patels, and a handful of North Star employees all looked down at the floor, their laughter from earlier still hanging faintly in the air like smoke after a fire. Caleb's face turned as pale as the table linens. He looked at Grant, confused, then at me, realizing that his employer and his wife's mother were connected in ways he hadn't even imagined. Sloane's voice cracked. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I thought you were just trying to find something to do." "I tried," I said softly. "Every time I began, you changed the subject or smiled like it was cute. I didn't want to preach about resilience over dinner. But you turned me into a punchline tonight." Her eyes glistened with tears. I took a breath, my voice lowering. "You once said dreams have expiration dates. Maybe you were right, but the expiration isn't on dreams, Sloane. It's on faith, the kind you lose when you stop believing in someone you claim to love. The chandeliers above seemed to burn whiter, sharper." I set the microphone down on the nearest table and stood tall. No one dared to move. Grant stepped closer, addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we laughed at a woman who built 6 companies and employs hundreds. Maybe the least we can do now is listen." No one spoke. Even the band, frozen mid-tune, didn't move to resume. I turned back to Sloane one last time. My voice softened, stripped of anger. "Tomorrow you'll understand what it means to be a mother, not when you give life, but when you swallow pride for the sake of someone else's." I left the microphone where it lay and walked toward the exit, the chandeliers spilling light behind me, like the echo of a truth too long withheld. 6 months later, Savannah smelled like spring again. The river shimmered under soft morning light, the air filled with the quiet rhythm of renewal. From the corner office of Wynn & Co.'s new headquarters, a glass front space overlooking the water, I could see the city waking. The same city that had once whispered about me now sent me proposals and invitations. Everything had changed faster than I imagined. 3 companies that had laughed that night were now clients signing consulting contracts worth more than their entire wedding budgets combined. Grant Marcel joined as my senior advisor, his presence bringing balance and quiet strength. Caleb Humboldt now addressed me as Miss Wynne in carefully worded emails requesting my approval on North Star's quarterly plans. Even Miriam, my older sister, who used to mock my little projects, had begun telling people my sister's a genius in business. Success never sounded so quiet. It didn't need to. Then one morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Sloan. "I don't know where to start. Can we meet tomorrow at River Street?" I typed back a single word, yes. The next morning, I found her waiting by the Riverside Cafe. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the glossy perfection that used to define her. No makeup, no audience, just a woman facing her own reflection. I deleted all the wedding posts, she said, her voice low. I couldn't stand seeing them anymore. I was so proud that night and so cruel at the same time. "You don't need to erase it," I replied. "Just remember it. Every time you're tempted to judge someone, remember that night." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I want to understand you better, Mom. I really do." I smiled faintly. "Start with respect and understanding will follow. Love only grows where respect lives first." She nodded, fumbling with her bag before pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a tiny microphone cast in gold. "A late birthday gift," she said softly. "You once stayed silent to protect me. Now I want to hear you speak." I lifted the small mic in my palm, its weight delicate but symbolic. Sometimes I said silence is its own speech. She smiled through her tears. For the first time in months, I saw the daughter I used to know. Later, I walked alone along the riverbank. The water shimmered, reflecting my face, back at me. Not the woman from that ballroom, not the mother humiliated under chandeliers, but someone whole, composed, and finally seen. They used to laugh when I said I was building an empire. I don't need to prove it anymore. Because the real empire isn't made of glass towers or balance sheets. It's built inside the quiet certainty that I no longer need anyone's permission to exist. The sunlight glinted off the river like scattered diamonds. I breathed in slow and steady, feeling the wind brush against my face. I've learned there are no real limits for women, only the ones others try to define for us and the ones we silently agree to obey. I've stopped agreeing.